Right. Welcome, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are in the world. We are very, very excited to have you here. Before we do introductions and kick off the webinar, just a couple quick housekeeping items for everyone. You can enter questions in the Q&A function. We'll get to those in the last sort of 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar. So please, throughout the conversation, add those into the Q&A. We'll make sure that we're tracking those. Any that we don't have time to answer today, we'll make sure that we get those responses to you in writing. So we will make sure that we answer all of your questions. And we're going to have a couple slides that will pop up and down throughout the conversation. So that is intentional. If you don't see slides, that means we don't have any up. We've had folks in the past who say, I can't see them. So we'll be bringing those up and down, and you'll get a copy of those this afternoon, as well as the recording of the webinar. So all of that will come to you. Don't feel like you have to take furious notes or screen captures. You'll get those at the end of the day today. Um, so, Mark, I am so excited to have you here. Would love for you to maybe quickly introduce yourself. I'll introduce myself as well, and then we can dive right into our conversation.
Well, Vanessa, it's definitely good to see you again. I always enjoy our times to catch up and really looking forward to the conversation today. To everyone on the webinar, my name is Mark Berry. I work at Southern Company, so we are a investor-owned utility. We have operations in 7 states. I am Senior Vice President of Research, Environment, and Sustainability for Southern Company. So what does that mean? So I work on technology development. I also am in charge of our engagement with federal regulators like the EPA, and I work with a broader team around our sustainability efforts at Southern.
Thank you for that, Mark. And I feel like you are maybe underselling a lot of your credentials. You do a whole host of things also outside of Southern Company as well. So I know folks are going to get a whole lot from you in this conversation. I am Vanessa Akhtar, Managing Director here at Kotter. I oversee our consulting practice, and I'm also part of our research and development team. I do a lot of work in the utility space. I've had the pleasure, Mark, of working with you for what, the last 5 or 6 years, I
No, it's
think.
been longer than that. It's been since 2017. So it's actually been 8 years.
It's, okay,
8
you are
years. So we've
testing me
had a
here.
relationship with Carter since 2017.
And maybe I don't know if you want to share a little bit about sort of how that relationship evolved over time.
Yeah, so I saw you guys out. You didn't seek me. So I guess that's kind of unique. So I was working with one of my colleagues and we were talking about how our organization was struggling with change management.
Mhm.
And my colleague, who is Jennifer Wynn, maybe Jennifer is out there listening, she said, Hey, I read this interesting book by this Harvard professor by the name of John Kotter. And she said, It's a really easy read. Even you can understand it, I think is how she phrased it. So the book was My Iceberg is Melting, and it's about these empress penguins, and
Mhm.
their iceberg is melting, and they're trying to figure out if they need to do something. And there was like all of this commotion. And in the story, you start seeing people kind of personalities in your organization. It kind of reflected what we were experiencing as we were trying to manage change in the organization. And so as a researcher, I'm kind of used to things changing, but that's from a technology standpoint.
Hmm.
And so you have cultures in your organizations, people have processes, they have preferences. And we were struggling with kind of how to communicate that we needed to change, what were the processes that we needed to change. And we were struggling. And Jennifer was out there reading, and then we just sent an email and we got contacted, and we had a great initial experience with Cotter, the professional staff there, and have had a couple of engagements on teams that I lead. And I know Carter is helping Southern Company and many other organizations, all from that first moment that kind of our teams met back in 2017, 2018.
Yeah. And I know, Mark, we've we've continued to use you as a sounding board too, as we continue to evolve our research. You are often one of our first readers of new research, new books. You are not shy about giving it to us straight, and you're like, this doesn't feel right. This is spot on. So I always
Yep.
appreciate that perspective that you bring. And I think that's part of what led us to this conversation too, is we've been looking at kind of current context, right? We are seeing uncertainty spike beyond what we have really ever seen before. And the level of disruption across industries, right? I feel like historically there have been some industries that have felt relatively stable, and that's just not the case anymore. I don't think I talk to any executives who say, yeah, we're in a good spot. We're kind of just trucking along. There's nothing big disruptive happening to us, right? And so really we've been thinking about, and you've been a great sounding board for us around the need for more adaptability, right? And as we think about some of the biggest challenges, and I'll ask you in a moment to share a little bit about what that looks like specifically in the utility industry. But really, as we've been seeing this shift in the environment, really thinking about adaptability as the competitive advantage for organizations going forward into the future. Kind of three key elements, and I'm sure this will come out in a number of ways in our conversation today, but really as we think about organizational adaptability, what does that mean? What does that entail? It's really looking at embracing more change-friendly management approaches. So as we think about things like scenario planning, strategic planning, talent management, goal setting, how do we do that in a way that is not so rigid, but actually has flexibility built into how we design it? Because the world around us may change pretty dramatically in the next week, month, year, right? And then really this idea of building adaptable cultures so that the culture is really actually ready to be adaptable, ready to pivot, ready to spot threats and opportunities when they arise and know when to respond and when not to respond, right? You don't want to be kind of changing course anytime something comes out in the environment, right? You really need to kind of understand when to pivot and when not to pivot. And then really sort of the idea of building broader change capabilities across the workforce. It can no longer just sit with senior leaders like you or say a change team or an HR team. It's really needed much more broadly across the organization. And this is kind of a theme that we're seeing across organizations around what's needed, but curious, Mark, sort of what you're seeing specifically in the utility space. What are some of the biggest disruptors in particular as we think about load growth? Like, how is that
Yeah,
shaping things up
I
for?
think in the utility industry, all you have to do is watch Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or pick up the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever place you go to get your information. If you go to Apple News, maybe you get a bunch of all of it. Just kind of
Yeah.
two themes that have really picked up in the utility industry the past few years. Number one is affordability.
Hmm.
How does your product remain affordable? And
Yeah.
then number two, data centers and reshoring of manufacturing, so load growth in general.
Yeah.
So since I started at Southern back in 1996, and so I've been in the utility industry almost 30 years now. And for most of my career, we were in a stable or declining, slightly declining growth situation.
Hmm.
But now, I mean, if you listen to any earnings call from major utilities, they talk about the size of their queues as, data centers and co-locators and developers and hyperscalers try to look for energy across the United States to bail out their business,
Hmm.
that the queues or the request for service is really big. So a couple of weeks ago, we had our earnings call, and our CEO talked about, hey, our queue is greater than 60 megawatts, even though we don't feel like all of that is going to come to fruition. It's just a step change from
Yeah.
where we would celebrate 150 megawatts. And now you may get a request from one single customer that could be 1,200 megawatts. So it's just different. So
Yeah.
for my career, it was about efficiency, how are we changing the technology that we're using? And now it's like a full sprint
Mm.
on, hey, how are we gonna meet the load? So change is happening. It's just the change is changing,
Yeah.
right? So we're having to adapt differently because the things that we probably used in the past may not work in this new environment.
Yeah. And I don't think I've ever walked through the doors of a single utility where affordability and reliability and safety were not like the three top priorities, right? That's table stakes, really. And I feel like we're in an environment now where affordability and reliability are starting to feel like they may be at odds with each other. When we think about the scale of load growth, how do we actually achieve that, build the infrastructure that's needed, get the right skills in place that's needed to actually make that happen, but still keep customer bills affordable at given the pace at which that growth is happening?
Yeah, so for us, I think Southern Company, we may be a little bit different than many different regions of the company. So we are vertically integrated and state regulated. And that means that, hey, we do the whole value chain when it comes to providing electricity. That is, we generated we transmit it over long distances and then we distribute it to individual customers and then bill those customers directly. And then our regulators really give us permission, like to say, hey, this is how much you can bill.
Right.
So when you talk to about adaptability and affordability, one thing that we did is we went to our regulators and we said, hey, we need some new rules because our current structure, the rule structure that you have given us, doesn't allow us to protect other customers from kind of the costs associated with this new load. And
Mm.
our regulators responded. So we have new requirements that protect existing customers from the
Mm.
cost of building out all this infrastructure. So
Mhm.
as we, make agreements with data centers or large load customers, we have a different set of requirements that we can pass on to them where they are paying the full freight and taking on the risk associated with the infrastructure build out. That is something different, right? We had to adapt to a new environment because we did not want to pass that risk on to existing customers. So we had to go to the regulator and say, hey, we need something new, and then the regulator had to recognize that and say, yeah, you're right. And we want you to do this. And the regulator also said, well, hey, you got to keep me up to date with how fast this is moving. And you have to let me look at the contracts to make sure that you are protecting other customers from these costs. And what we found is that the hyperscalers and the data centers, they understand that they need to carry those costs. They don't want to put any financial burden on others.
Yeah.
Now, that may not be the case in other markets,
Mhm.
but that is true for our market.
Yeah. And I think it's a great point when we think about adaptability and a mindset around adaptability, a culture around adaptability. In the utility industry, it's really easy to say we can't do that because of regulators, right? It becomes an excuse at times, and it's real. It's a real challenge and a real guardrail that you do have to work through. But that's a different way of thinking, of saying we're going to proactively go to them and say, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're anticipating. We need to change how we're working together. We need to change your expectations to actually be able to deliver against what the market is expecting. And that's a pretty big shift, I think, from 5, 10, 15 years ago in terms of thinking about that relationship with regulators and how proactive you all can be on your end to say, we're actually going to bring a point of view to this conversation and actually push a little bit.
Yeah, one thing that I think that you have to have from the beginning is a set of principles that guide you
Yeah.
through when things are changing. So at Southern, we have something called the circle of life, and it's really how kind of the whole team really thinks about our relationship with the customer. So the customer is at the center. So we want to advocate for things that are beneficial for the customer, then then that is built on three pillars. One is constructive regulation. So this relationship with the regulator, we want to make sure we have healthy capital spending, right? We don't want to overspend. We don't want to take risks that
Mhm.
might inflate earnings in the near term,
Yeah.
but could hurt customers in the long term. And then the third kind of pillar is high reliability. So you mentioned reliability.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you've been really learning the playbook from utilities in terms of reliability, low prices. So that would be affordability, and then high customer satisfaction. So customers are happy when their bills are as low as they can be and they
Mhm.
have high reliability.
Yeah. Yeah, we all want the lights to turn on when we flick the light switch, right? Or if there's a storm, we want to know that power is going to be restored quickly. I think all of us sometimes forget that, or a lot of folks who work at utilities, I remind them all the time, you're also a customer of utilities, right? So like that's a benefit that you all have that maybe some other industries don't have is like you live the customer experience every single day, right?
Yeah, so the product that we produce, we consume, and our customers are our neighbors as well.
Mhm.
So, as a company, one of our core tenets is that we want to be a kind of citizen wherever we serve. So,
Mhm.
not only do we want to serve, you know, clean, safe, affordable, reliable electricity, we
Mhm.
also want to make our communities better where we live.
Yeah.
So those kind of things work together.
Yeah. And I love where you're going with sort of the idea of grounding in principles, right? And as we think about the idea of change-friendly management systems and management approaches, right? That's one of the things we've been thinking a lot about is sort of this move from rules-based decision making to principles-based decision making. So even as you're talking about smart capital spend, there's space for interpretation within what that means, right? So if the environment changes, it's not limit capital spend to the lowest number we possibly can, right? Smart capital spend means we have to take into account what is the context, what's the environment, what are the market dynamics, what do our customers need, and matching our capital spend to address that. It gives you more flexibility in how you drive decisions within that than being very held to rigid rules.
Yeah, I would say, look, the longest I've been at Southern for 28 years, in the industry for about 30, and the circle of life has been there the entire time,
Mm.
right? But the
Yeah.
situation in the company has changed over time,
Mhm.
and we're facing kind of new challenges,
Mhm.
kind of a new marketplace, for
Yeah.
for instance, but those principles remain the same.
Yeah.
However, like you said, in some instances they are applied a little bit differently.
Yeah. How have you seen, I guess, the need for the culture to shift as the environment and as the market demands have shifted?
Yeah, so one example I'll use is last year with the Electric Power Research Institute. So Southern Company is a member of EPRI. EPRI is the research arm of the utility industry, kind of founded back in 1972. And I sit on one of the committees, and we were in Dallas, Texas. And they arranged for us to go visit a data center. Like I had never been in one of these data centers. So they drove us out and we were walking through and we were talking to the construction people. And they were like, yeah, we can do this. We can build this thing in 3 years. We can
Mm.
build a whole campus in 3 years. And if you think about the size of the campus could be uh, 1,000 megawatts,
Mm.
right? So for us to build a unit in 3 years to serve a data center, like,
Yeah.
hey, that's tough for us. So for us, I mean, a natural gas combined cycle, the construction time frame is 3 years, and you got all the planning and stuff up front. And then if the data center where they're located, you actually have to build the transmission and the substation to serve the data center. So
Hmm.
the pace of which that we have to move to meet the customer needs, remember the customer is at the center,
Yeah.
It's just kind of unprecedented for us,
Yeah.
right? So our processes and things that were built to provide high reliability, low prices, and high customer satisfaction previously in the past 2, 3 decades when I was here, like it is a new day and a new expectation. And so you really have to look at your processes and say, hey, do we need to do something different so
Hmm.
that we can move faster? So it's just a new day. And I see both leaders and rank and file employees kind of embracing the challenge.
Hmm.
One thing that in the book, My Iceberg is Melting, was Fred was trying to get people to realize that the iceberg was melting. So he had this whole thing where he had to do all this convincing.
Yeah.
But right now, because when you go home, you look on the TV, all you hear is data center, data center, data center. This is so in front of us
Hmm.
that opportunity kind of begets change.
Hmm.
And so for us in this space, people are responding because they see the opportunity. Now, that's not the case when you
Yeah.
might need to change something small in your organization. It's a different approach,
Hmm.
right? Because now Fred, our Empress Penguin, has to influence and get people to see that there is a need for change. And sometimes that comes from a threat, sometimes that comes from an opportunity.
Hmm.
But change is change. The process that you probably go through is very similar, but sometimes people can see it, sometimes they don't, and they react differently.
Yeah. And I think, right, you touched on sort of, let's see if this will share. It doesn't want to share my screen. I was going to share a slide, but I'll just speak to it. It doesn't seem to want to share, but we'll make sure that folks get them afterwards. But you were talking about sort of the idea of we still need to get the technology right. We still need to be safe and deliver it in a reliable way, but we have to address it or go after it in a more agile fashion. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we've been thinking about in terms of as we think about management approaches or the sort of processes that you have in place, it's not about giving up the reliability or efficiency
No, no, you
side
can't.
of it, right?
You
That's
can't.
not, you can't. And
You can't.
especially in an industry like utilities where that could create a life or death situation if you're not smart about it, right? But that doesn't mean the way you've always done it of kind of hyper methodical, slow way of doing it has to be the way that you approach the entire end-to-end process. There are areas that you can build in more agility, more kind of agile ways of working into that. But you also need a culture that is open to that, a culture that is trusting of those closest to the work to make the decisions around where you can be more agile and where you maybe need to be a little bit more methodical. You need to have a culture that is thinking both about the short term and the long term and really holding both of those things in mind. And that's a really new way of thinking and operating for a lot of organizations. And we see a lot in your industry. People don't grow up being taught that skill set, right? It is also unique in that people, to your point, you've been there almost 30 years. That's an anomaly in a lot of other industries, but it is not in the utility space, right? Long tenure, build a career in one organization. So people aren't explicitly taught what this looks like. It can be a really hard transition to say, I understand things need to change, right? To your point, like that mindset has shifted of we know we can't be complacent anymore, but there's still a gap of but how do I do it? I don't know what that looks like to make that transition. That can feel scary for people of, can I do it? And do I still have a place here? Can I still contribute to this new way?
Yeah, I don't think one thing when you were talking, I was thinking about, hey, if I work at one of the nuclear plants, like I can start there
Hmm.
and work there my entire career. And
Yeah.
when I retire, like the next person can probably do the same thing. Like these
Yeah.
assets last 60 to 80 years.
Hmm.
So in some places, you may not see a lot of change. In other parts of the organization, you may see a lot of change,
Mhm.
but it's probably at a different pace. So if you work at a gas facility, a natural gas facility, those units are built to last 30, 40 years. Work at a coal unit, it could last up to 60 years. So
Mhm.
when we are constructing new infrastructure, that infrastructure is going to be there for some time.
Mhm.
So you have to get it right. If you don't get it right, then you got to do it over. And that's higher
Mhm.
cost pressures,
Yeah.
lower reliability. Lower reliability means you're not happy if your stuff goes off every time it rains,
Yeah.
right? So this whole circle of life kind of works together. And so for us, most of the time you don't need to change everything, you need to change one or two things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what you were kind of talking about. Like, hey, we're not going to throw everything out. We're going to keep a lot of good stuff, but in
Mhm.
order to meet the need, you need to change this or that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and it's interesting, there was now screen share wants to work. The wonders of technology, right? Live change and adaptability as we chat, y'all. Um, the World Economic Forum recently came out with a study around what do executives believe the most critical skills are for today's world. And I have to admit, I was expecting to see a lot of the technical skills much higher on the list. Analytical thinking is the top one. I think that goes, Mark, somewhat to what you're chatting about is like being able to understand where we need to change, where we don't need to change, being able to think through what those long-term implications are in this environment. But they also, right, the second two, agility and leadership, were ranked second and third, right? And so really this is becoming a skill set that is so needed, whether it is looking at, to your point, like one big change that may come in your environment and knowing that then like the infrastructure component may be really stable for a while after that. Or it could be a whole lot of things changing in your environment. Like if I'm thinking about some of the corporate functions within utilities, right? Of like, how does the technology team need to be working and deploying new applications to support the business? That's changing all the time, right? New customer systems, new ERP systems, like AI, right, is dramatically shifting. And so there's a huge volume, but regardless of one big thing or lots of things coming simultaneously, these skill sets are needed so much more broadly across the organization to be able to handle that and to be able to figure out where do I need to actually change? How do I help other people come along with that? And where do I actually have the discernment to say, maybe we need to give it a beat before we actually shift our
Yeah,
strategy?
look, I really love this 61% win leadership and social influence. So
Mhm.
I was a military officer at one point before I joined the utility, and people, used to ask me kind of what's the difference.
Mhm.
And I would say in the military it's more command and control.
Mhm.
And in the marketplace, it's more about influence, right? You may have a position of authority that gives you very little power. I
Yeah.
think people overthink how much power you get from position,
Mhm.
uh, and influence and that social piece and emotional intelligence is becoming more and more important. And
Mhm.
I do see sometimes as people kind of go up through the ranks, it takes them a while to make that transition. They
Mhm.
think, oh, now I'm the supervisor, I get to tell people what to do. And
Yeah.
it's not really that way. I
Yeah.
mean, it's more about supporting the team so that you have more influence with the team and you
Mhm.
know who on the team has the influence. And one
Mhm.
thing that I learned in my kind of partnership with Kotter is that, hey, your job as a leader is probably to set the strategy and the vision,
Yeah.
and that you need the team to actually kind of reinforce the change and the culture and the behaviors. And it's not like people who you assign to do that. It's
Right.
the people who already have that credibility that you
Yeah.
have to influence
Yeah.
to get the change executed.
Mhm.
And so I see kind of that one. as
Yeah.
one that is part of the kind of the Kotter kind of 8 stages of change. And that one kind of connects to that for me.
Yeah. I mean, I still remember when we were working with your research team and we did an organizational network analysis, and you all were like, we know who the influencers are. And then we showed the list, and you're like, oh, we didn't know who the
We
influencers
did
were.
we did not, and it's not necessarily about title, right?
Exactly.
It's really not. And you got to know that. And if you aspire to leadership, then that's one of the big things that you need to really embrace. If
Yeah.
you want to lead and affect change in your organization, you have to have the influence to do that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we often see a gap, I think, especially and military is much more extreme on command and control,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah, it is.
I think a lot of utilities have some microcultures like that. And so folks who are seen as influential don't always see themselves as leaders because they're like, but I don't have the title. Or do I now need to use my influence to try to do exactly what my leader thinks should be done? When in reality, like those that are closest to the work are going to see the opportunities, they're going to see the threats a lot faster than their leaders are going to see it. And so also as leaders, like really surrounding them to help them understand, we really mean it when we say we want you to spot those things and take action against them. And we've got your back and we're going to give you air cover around that.
Yeah, well, if I look at that top one, analytical thinking,
Mhm.
I think that is going to become more and more important as AI proliferates through organizations.
Yeah.
Being able to tell that, yeah, this thing is hallucinating and it's not giving you the right answer.
Mhm.
Like you still going, it's just another tool, like a computer or a typewriter back in the day,
Yeah.
that you still have to be able to think through the process. So I think analytical thinking is going to become more and more important. So I was glad to see that it was number one.
Yeah. And that prompts me, we were chatting a few weeks ago about AI, right? And it's hard to decouple the idea of low growth and AI, right? Because data centers and AI are such a big driver of that. It's not the only driver, but it's the biggest driver of that. And it's interesting, you and I were chatting about, thinking about AI strategy, right? And I think a lot of folks are feeling like we've got to catch up, we've got to catch up, we've got to figure out how we use AI without pausing to say, it shouldn't be what's our AI strategy. It's how does AI accelerate
Our
the rest
business
of our
strategy.
strategy?
Yeah.
And let's be really thoughtful, use that analytical thinking to say, how does it help accelerate other elements of our strategy? Let's not just run down the AI path for the sake of AI that can then become actually a distraction to what people are focused on. It can then become noise in the system that keeps them from thinking about what else they need to do to meet the challenges of today. And so I think that's a shift that not enough folks are necessarily thinking about.
Yeah, I see, when I hear people talk about AI, they talk about it like a thing,
Mhm.
right? And it is an object in a way, right? It is something that, hey, you can pay for or you can do, but it's almost like a movement. And how do you adapt that within your culture? Like what works for your culture?
Yeah.
And I remember I got guidance some time ago about, hey, you should think about AI as how can it help you solve your biggest challenges?
Hmm.
And I think we look for the application
Yeah.
versus the challenge. And so,
Hmm.
how do you rank your challenges or your opportunities and say, hey, what's the value proposition? How fast I can get there? And then structure it for that.
Yeah. Yeah, because if there's just we hear this all the time, not just in utilities, but across industries, like some sort of AI mandate. We expect everybody to use AI every day or every week in their jobs. And then really what we're seeing is people use it to take meeting notes. And they're like, look, I checked the box. I use AI. And much more that it can do if you are thoughtful to your point, like how does it solve our biggest challenges, right? Do we have a workforce planning strategy that's efficient and allows us to flex to shifting customer needs? If not, maybe AI can help manage some of that. Think about how are we bundling work? What are the best routes for people? Can we predict where we may expect outages or gas leaks or what have you to be able to get ahead of those things? There's like so much more that AI can do for you if you're thinking about it as how can it help us solve our challenges instead of
Hmm.
just how do we find ways to use a tool?
Yes, yes, I definitely agree with that. And I see Southern making that transition as we kind of
Mhm.
mature in how
Yeah.
we use AI. So our CEO, Chris Womack, this is one of his passion areas about, hey, how do we use data to deliver value to customer, right? And it's kind of a focus on value creation
Mhm.
versus the use. So how do you frame your opportunities in terms of value and then use the tool to help you deliver more value?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be curious, Mark. We were chatting yesterday and sort of about where you've seen some of this done really well, thinking about kind of taking a more agile and adaptable way of thinking about planning and executing to meet the challenges that we're seeing in the environment. I would love for you to maybe share with our attendees a little bit of what you shared with me yesterday, particularly around maybe what you're seeing at Georgia Power.
Yeah, so it was interesting. So we have a leader. Her name is Fran Forehand. At one point, she was chief transmission officer for Georgia Power, and Georgia Power has stated publicly that it needs to build 500 miles of 500 kV transmission lines, right? And that's a lot. So,
Mhm.
in terms of the history of the company in the last 10 years, we have built maybe 50 miles for our new nuclear plant out in Waynesboro, Georgia. And so, Fran looked at it and said, hey, we can't do it the way we did it then because it took us 8 years and we have five.
Mhm.
So let's look at all of our processes and how we are organized to take time out of the process.
Mhm.
So from a process standpoint, kind of her leadership was how can we be better organized for success?
Mhm.
And then another leader within Southern Company, our construction person at Southern Company Services said, hey, we have to build transmission line from A to B, B to C, C to D, E to F, right? Because we got 500 miles. So how can we better design so that we can use a common set of infrastructure
Mhm.
along the way, right? Where it may be, in some cases, 5% more than what we need, but it accelerates the time,
Mhm.
right? So how can we change the way we design to help us move faster? And so this was leaders challenging the team to figure it out, but not
Mhm.
necessarily giving them the answers,
Yeah.
right? It was the challenge and the openness and saying, hey, this is my expectation that we need to shorten. And that gave the team or the community license to do something different.
Yeah. And that's such an important piece, the license and permission, right? And being really clear that, like, actually, it's an expectation to challenge the status quo, to say,
Yes.
well, and it's not saying what we did in the past was bad,
No.
right? But our environment has changed. So, to your point, what worked then is not going to work today. And let's acknowledge that. Let's honor what we've done historically and been successful doing historically. But, like, actually, my expectation is for you to challenge that now
Yep.
because it's not going to get us where we need to be today.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that maybe makes because you're gonna have people on the team that may not want to change, but
Mhm.
when you create that environment of expectation of change, then it really empowers those that do
Mhm.
to kind of get in there and push.
Yeah.
And once the leader or the organization adopts that, then everybody has to get on board.
Hmm. Yeah. Where do you feel like maybe there have been some of the biggest challenges in making that shift, either in how the work gets done or the culture around kind of accepting this shift towards more agility and adaptability in an industry that is very grounded in safety and reliability and efficiency? Like, where have you seen the biggest challenges in making that
Yeah, I
transition?
think the point is we so much focus on kind of the process to do things
Yeah.
that maybe sometimes we act like we're in a vacuum
Mhm.
and there is a community there. There is, not just so energy is local. So if you want to build a transmission line, if you're going to build it, then you're going to impact someone locally,
Mhm.
right? So if they don't know why, if they don't believe that you're acting in their best interests,
Mhm.
then that can slow you down. It's not just the technical part,
Yeah.
but you can look at it from that micro level. Then you can look at it from a city level, like what are people hearing on the news?
Mhm.
Not everyone is for this or not. So what is the narrative kind of out in the community?
Mhm.
And how do you get not necessarily kind of your messages out there for people to consider? Like, hey, this is how we're doing this. This is why we're doing this.
Mhm.
And then you have elected officials or governments, like they have to be informed as well. So
Yeah.
the change is not just internal to the
Yeah.
people who are doing it and the organization that's performing the work, but if you are a utility, it's the community,
Mhm.
right? And you have to help people see what you are doing, why you are doing it, and they have to feel that you are doing it in a way that is best for everyone involved. They're
Yeah.
not taking on risks, they're not losing anything, they're not paying more. And if that is the case, then you have to tell them that
Yeah.
and explain why that is the case. So we
Yeah.
can't think about the change in our bubble. We kind of have to push it out and think more broadly in terms of how many people are participating in this, both actively and passively.
Yeah. Really thinking about the full ecosystem
Yes.
that surrounds it. Yeah. Um, well, I am keeping an eye on time, and I do want to get to some of the Q&As, but maybe just like a kind of a quick bow on some of the things that we have chatted about, um, and really thinking about what does this look like in terms of we started this really looking at load growth and demand growth, but it's bigger than that, right? There are a lot of disruptors happening in the industry. And so really looking at all of those, adaptability is the competitive advantage that will allow you to get there, to think differently, to address the changing dynamics in the market. And so really thinking about change-friendly management approaches and systems, balancing adaptability and agility with reliability and efficiency. And so things like principles-based decision making instead of rules-based decision making. Things like getting more people involved, sharing information early, like you were just chatting about. Like people have to be informed, right? Information cannot be held to the, knowledge is power kind of cliche. Got to get people the information, let them know what answers you have, what answers you don't have, so that they are ready for the changes that are coming and they're ready for even the maybe some of the messiness too of what we know and don't know. Um, really thinking about the culture, making sure that it is aligned to your strategy, right? It's not a one size fits all culture that's needed. It needs to be aligned to what you're trying to achieve, but it has to have some of that adaptability built into it. The idea of being more proactive, taking on and being open to appropriate risk. We're not talking about risk that's, off the charts going to put people's safety at risk when we think about utilities, but there's an appropriate level of risk taking that's needed to really kind of move things. And then we need more people with this skill set, more people who understand what it looks like to spot threats and opportunities and then act on it, bring other people along with them, feel empowered to do that. And so, really thinking about kind of these three things in concert is going to build that adaptability that you need. And it's kind of a virtuous cycle in the way that we're thinking about it, right? You lose any of those three pillars, and it becomes a lot harder to actually take the organization where it needs to go. So, in our last 15 minutes, there are a number of questions for you, Mark. I'm not surprised, very explicitly calling you out. I knew this would be the case when we invited you to join us today. Um, so, the first one, Mark, somebody asked, what were the three biggest indicators or pain points that led you to seek change management support for your team and your organization?
Yeah, I would say so. I did two different engagements with Kotter. The first engagement was more threats, right? It was more threat based,
Hmm.
meaning that, hey, the company had, kind of pressure to meet earnings per share. How do we get more efficient in our business? How do we get more return for the assets that we were managing? So it's
Yeah.
kind of a threat.
Hmm.
Right. And I could see that people were very resistant to, hey, we don't want to think about this business different. We've been doing it this way for 30, 40 years, and it was a well-functioning business, right?
Hmm.
However, in terms of our financial pressure, we have financial pressures where we needed to change. So it's kind of a threat base. The second engagement was on the research side, and it was more opportunity based.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that engagement was 5 or so years ago. We had a new administration. We were trying to relook at our strategy. How did it align with DOE, its priorities? And we saw lots of change, lots of focus on decarbonization. And
Hmm.
it seemed like, hey, this is an opportunity for our business that we needed to be more proactive.
Hmm.
So it was opportunity. How can we partner with DOE in terms of its priorities and our priorities like alignment
Hmm.
and pursue? How do we have a vision around that? And then what behaviors that we needed the employees to have in order to pursue those opportunities. So it was vision, culture, but the biggest part of it was behaviors. Like, hey, this is a expectation and you are empowered. That is your role. And my role is to go find the money for us to go and do this. So we
Yeah.
all had our roles, but our vision needed to be clear. It needed
Hmm.
to be aligned, and everyone needed to know their role.
Yeah. Yeah.
So two different situations, right? Same principles. Carter used the same principles, but they used them in a way that worked for both situations.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I love the sort of the call out around the behavioral piece with the work with your research team. And I still remember there was one of your managers who was engaged in the work who at first he was like, this isn't gonna, this isn't gonna go. We're not actually gonna be able to make these changes because XYZ, right? He had his list. And then when he realized that you all really meant it, of like, no, we really do want to empower you and we want you to have more agency and be able to do things differently, the switch that he made. And then everyone looked at it and was like, well, if he believes it.
If he doing it, but he
Yeah.
was an influencer, right?
Yep.
He was
Hmm.
an influencer.
Yeah. So another question for you, Mark. Somebody asked, what do you think gives Southern a competitive advantage over your competitors in the current environment?
So for us, we operate in a regulated monopoly. So we
Mhm.
don't necessarily have competitors for our product. So we do have EMCs in our area and they have their own generation. We don't necessarily see them as competitors per se. In the state of Georgia, there is this thing called customer choice that if you're greater than 900 kilowatts,
Mhm.
then you get to make a one-time choice of if you're a new load, who you want to serve. And George Power is very uh, successful in winning a lot of that load, but it's more about prices, reliability, customer satisfaction. Those are the things that win it for you. We are though competitive in the marketplace for capital.
Hmm.
Right. And, we do well. Our stock here recently was over $100 first time in the history of our company. But I do think it's the same things, right? It's constructive regulatory environment. If you listen to our earnings call, people talk about that. They talk about healthy capital spending, like we're judicious in where we invest capital. And then having the customer in the center with kind of low prices, high reliability, and high customer satisfaction. Like that circle of life
Yeah.
gives us, I think, an advantage,
Yeah.
but it also aligns the team. Like everybody knows that that's what we're going for.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of these other questions ties a little bit. I think you answered part of it, and it's something that we're seeing. Um, I think a lot of utilities struggle with. Somebody asked, given customers' demand for clean, safe, reliable energy and constantly changing regulatory shifts, right? And every administration, right, comes with new ways of thinking about regulatory actions and what that looks like. How is Southern navigating that in the way that you're thinking about investments and readying the workforce?
Yeah, so like I told you, I'm responsible for our engagement with EPA. And we try to have a constructive tone with
Mhm.
every administration. That doesn't mean that we change our mind with every administration. We argue for the same, or we advocate for the same things,
Mhm.
right? Because we are advocating for things that we believe that are good for the customer, right? And we're advocating to the administration to say, hey, we want you to think about it this way,
Mhm.
because this is what's in the best interest of our customer in terms of clean energy, in terms of protecting the environment, right? We are very customer centric, which allows us to say the same specific things, whether if it's the Obama administration, Trump administration, Biden administration, or Trump administration. There are like common threads uh, that we are advocating for because it's good for the customer.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
in terms of kind of our generation mix, like in our R&D department, we're working on those things so that when they become available, our company can act quickly. And I'll just give an example. When I joined the company in 1996, we had an energy storage researcher, right? He left the company and went to work for Disney.
Mhm.
But we have had energy storage research within our R&D department since 1996, which meant as these technologies, so we work with EPRI and other partners to say, hey, how would we adopt this technology within our ecosystem?
Yeah.
And so if you go and you look at our plans, we plan to have 5 gigawatts of energy storage in our system by 2030, which is a faster adoption rate than others, but it is at a price point where it makes good sense for our customers. So it's still customer first. And how can you leverage technology in a way that supports low prices, high reliability, and
Mhm.
good customer satisfaction?
Yeah. Great. And scrolling down to some others, I will take one. So, based on how long Cotter's change management model is, has there been any consideration to changing it? The principles are sound, but I found it interesting that change is constant, but the approach to navigating change doesn't change. So, what I would say is our research is constantly evolving. And I think, Mark, you've experienced this on the side around then how do we implement and operationalize it? I think some of the core principles don't change, right? If I boil down our research to one sentence, it's more leadership from more people is really what is needed to navigate change and navigate it effectively. And really thinking about how do you align and activate positional leaders to set, to your point, set that vision of what's possible, where we're going, and why. engage many more people to actually make that a reality, make them feel a part of it, and then make sure that you're driving towards results and actually engineering results along the way, not just waiting for them to happen organically. But I think for a lot of folks who maybe know John's early work, where it was sequential and linear, and you do step one, you check the box, you do step two, you check the box. We know that that's not the environment we're living in. It's much more iterative. You may jump between
Hmm.
different steps and accelerators, but some of the core concepts around really getting people engaged and understanding where you're going, giving them agency to contribute to that, having wins along the way. Those principles don't change, but how they get applied certainly do. And then I think our overlay recently around the neuroscience piece of are people in a state of survive or a state of thrive based on the change? How do you adapt your approach to leading change based on that? I think was an important evolution in our research and the way that we think about then applying some of John's decades of work and empirical research of what works well, but shifting how it gets applied based on some of that. But curious, Mark, if you'd have anything to add based on your experience of seeing it applied sort of in flexible ways based on the context.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I called Cotter for the kind of the opportunity was I read the book and y'all were focused on kind of survive or thrive. And I felt as an organization, in our research organization, we were just kind of surviving at the time, and that we really needed to step up our energy, and that was the thrive. And kind of my early engagement in the threat mindset,
Mhm.
right? But reading that book about digital transformation, which one of the chapters was Thrive and Survive, I was sitting there. I was actually out, and I just had the book and I was reading it, and I was like, "Oh, I need to call." So I called and said, "Hey, I need y'all to come and help us with this," because I do think the mindset of the people is important,
Yeah,
and that was one of my main goals, was to move us from survive to thrive.
yeah. And then I think the one other piece I would add answers another question here. And I think it's a great question to end us on. If you could give one piece of advice to utility executives preparing for the next decade of transformation, what would it be? And I would say, really, it's becoming clearer and clearer to me every day that we dig into this research around adaptability. I would advise utility executives to start now in really intentionally building that adaptability into the organization. Think about where are there places where we are overly rigid in the way that we manage the business, and how can we start to change that now before it's too late? How do we start to evolve our culture? We know culture change takes a long time. How do we start to evolve our culture to build in that adaptability as just part of how we work, part of that muscle of who we are, and really start to invest in building those skills broadly across the workforce? It will pay dividends the more people that you have that are able to do that. So I think my piece of advice is really start today if you haven't already started, and make adaptability one of your top priorities. And Mark, maybe I want to give you a final word. What's the advice that
Yeah.
you give
So
maybe
look, I
at
was sitting here thinking
utility
like, hey,
executive?
how would I maybe add to that? And so, you have these sayings that, hey, you got to have the right strategy. Then you hear that culture eats strategy for lunch, like people like saying that. And it
Hmm.
might be true, but change management is kind of the lifeblood of an organization.
Hmm.
And if you're not open to change and you don't know how to change, then you won't be able to execute.
Yeah.
And that's something that I have learned as I have risen up in leadership, where it became less about what I knew
Hmm.
and what I could enable people to do. Right. So you got to set strategy. People, it's got to be aligned and all of that. But you're going to have something that is working against it.
Mhm.
right? Because you got a new strategy for a reason,
Right.
right? You're doing something different for a reason.
Mhm.
But if people are resistant to it, then you're not going to get there. And
Mhm.
so the change part is an enabler. And as I kind of talk to Southern Company leaders about, hey, you can't miss the change piece.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people have reached out to you based on kind of my feedback to them. And I strongly believe that you got to have strategy, you got to have culture, but all those things they got to change.
Mhm.
You got to meet the moment.
Yeah.
And if you don't know how to do that, you are not going to be successful.
Yeah. I love that. Got to be ready to meet the moment.
Yep, you got to meet the
I'm gonna
moment.
carry that with me for the rest of today and well into, the next few weeks as I think about this too, right? I think it applies to all of us. And Mark, I'm so thankful that you took the time today. I always so enjoy our chats. I could talk to you all day, and I feel like we let people in on one of our coffee chats today.
Yep,
And
yep.
I just really appreciate the time. I always learn something from you. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. And for those who weren't able to join but listen to the recording, thank you so much. We will get you the slides. For any questions we didn't answer, we will make sure to get those answers out to you as well. And we hope that you keep in touch. You can find us on our website, reach out to me or Mark on LinkedIn. We'd love to continue the conversation with you all.
Thank y'all.
Well, thank you, Mark.
Thanks.